This is Mirror World episode 001. I'm so glad for you to join. I'm speaking with Helen Zuman. Helen wrote a memoir called Mating in Captivity, an account of her 5 years at Zendeck Farms, which is, as she puts it, a cult with a radical take on sex and relationships. She's been to numerous other intentional communities before and after that period of her life. Helen has a valuable perspective on how humans organize, where it goes right, where it goes wrong, and I'm totally excited to catalog a portion of her insights on this project. Helen hosts her own podcast, Chocolate Church, which I was on, so you should go check that out. She hand makes chocolate as a sacrament to her listeners, so another reason for you to go check it out. I got to meet up at her house in Beacon, New York, which should be an episode all on its own. If you're listening to the audio only, just know we're surrounded by pine shiplap and organic insulation. It's pretty dope. The video is going to be uploaded on our Mirror World Odyssey channel, so go over there, follow us. Let's explore another side. Welcome, Helen.
Thank you.
Helen Zuman. That's how you pronounce your name, correct?
It is.
For the record. Welcome to Mirror World, the inaugural episode.
I'm honored to be part of the inaugural episode.
This podcast, videocast, is meant to be like a mobile podcast, and so I'm very grateful that you let me come over to do this. I at first was like inviting you to come over. I was like, wait. Already breaking my own rules. It's like we want to come to, our guests like habitat, so like get a more immersive experience and don't take them out of their element. Not saying this is your only environment, but any excuse I can get to come back to your house, I'm going to take. Mm-hmm. I was introduced to you through one of my really good friends, Lauren and John, who are also here in Beacon, and now they've since moved to Vermont. But they had mentioned to me like, hey, Helen is really dope. You should get in touch with her. And how long has it been now? Like half a year? Like I came to visit you like 6 months ago, maybe a year ago.
Something like
Some
that.
long time.
6 months.
Flies.
Probably
6
more
months.
like 6 months.
Let's say 6 months ago.
Yeah.
And then I remember our conversations kind of about looking at things a little bit differently than most people, and we could empathize with like being isolated in our viewpoints. So and then I had found out that you went through this experience of when you were in college, you had a grant to go study intentional communities, right? And then, so I was wondering if you could just kind of tell me a little bit more about that. Like, how did you get the impetus to like start that journey? Like, not many people even in college know about intentional communities, right? At least my generation. Mm-hmm. I was born in the late 80s. So like, how about for you? Like, how did you even hear about like, oh, there are these people who want to live a different way intentionally, quote unquote, So
right. Well, my first experience of living kind of in a community was a very small one. Happened the summer before my senior year of college. I had taken a year off from school, and at the very end of that year, in August of that year, I ended up at this wilderness homestead in Arizona called the Rivas Mountain School of Self-Reliance. I had found it by a circuitous route involving hitchhiking in a hostel in Phoenix and just was intrigued by it. Mm-hmm. And
what year was this?
1998.
Okay.
So it was 13 acres in the Superstition Wilderness, off the grid, about a 1 acre garden, grew lots of food, this huge orchard with tons of figs at that time of the year. It was amazing to just pick the figs right off the tree and eat them.
Nice.
All kinds of stonemasonry, weird little huts called yurpies. And that was my first experience of growing food. Mm-hmm. I remember saving seeds from a lettuce plant. Like, I didn't know lettuce plants bolted and made seeds, so it was the beginning of that. And during that month, I was eating all this amazing food, most of it just from the land. And by the time I left to go back to school, I took the Greyhound bus. It was a 3-day trip. well, on the Greyhound bus, I had this huge, transparent garbage bag full of fruits and vegetables. That was what I ate. It was like my traveling companion on the bus that I ate all the way home. But by the end of that month, I felt so light and so good. It was partly because I had shed some weight from just eating real food and doing lots of exercise. But
like physical labor.
Yeah. But it wasn't just weight. It was also like the composition of my body had changed. That's how it felt. So then I went back to school feeling I had always felt like a misfit, but even more so than ever because I had now taken a year off and most of the people I knew had graduated. And so when I went back, I didn't want to live in a dorm. I hadn't been doing that before I left anyway. And I ended up in this place called the Dudley Co-op, which is part of Harvard. That's where I was going, but is off campus. It's sort of the place for the misfits. And unlike at a dorm, in the dorms, other people were cooking for you and cleaning for you and all this stuff. At the co-op, we cooked for ourselves, cleaned for ourselves, basically took care of the place. We had a compost bin out back, which I took care of. And that was my first experience of feeling like I belonged. And it was partly based on the joint care of a place and on values around food. Like we ordered our own food from UNFI, United Natural Foods International. It wasn't all organic or anything, but it was a hell of a lot better than what they were serving in the dining halls in terms of ingredients.
This was in Harvard?
Yeah.
This was in Harvard? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, Cambridge.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And we had a CSA membership and stuff like that. So living there and taking part in this joint effort, and just being with all these people who were, a little weird, I really enjoyed that. And it was only going to last for a year because I was graduating. Mm-hmm. So I thought, well, how could I recreate some version of this experience after graduation, a version that continues indefinitely? And I'm not exactly sure how I first heard about intentional communities. The place in Arizona, I don't think I was thinking of it that way. But I discovered this book called The Communities Directory, and I ordered a copy of it. And that winter in my room, I'd be looking through this book and kind of, dreaming of places to go. And part of what I was looking for this community aspect, but also I wanted to learn more about food growing and just like the basics of life, like,
sure.
Buildings and plumbing and, all those things that industrialized humans take for granted. Mm-hmm. I just wanted to know more about those things. And so when one of my professors encouraged me to apply for this grant, I wrote my proposal about visiting this kind of place.
Nice. Okay, this kind of place. So you were like, your proposal was like, I'm going to drive in a car? And or like,
no,
how was that?
Absolutely not. Right. I don't drive.
Right.
No, my proposal was just to travel to intentional communities in North America that grew their own food and had other aspects of homesteading going on and learn practical things and basically just explore. That was about it.
So to travel, you were going to take buses and and trains.
Yeah, well, I ended up taking buses and hitchhiking and walking and like getting rides with people.
Was there for these communities, how did you do your research? Was there websites for them? Social media? Like this is what, 98, 99?
This was 1999.
Yeah, so pre-Y2K.
Pre-Y2K and Google existed, but it was very primitive. So yeah, for the most part, I was just looking at the listings in the book, and then like in one case, there's a community called Eastwind in Missouri, which I applied to go. I didn't end up going, but I applied to go there, and I think I wrote them a letter, and they wrote me a letter back.
Wow.
And then one place, it was in Staten Island, I just got in the ferry and went to visit because I was...
What are they called in Staten Island?
Ganas, Ganas,
right. They're still around.
Yeah, they're still around.
They're still around, yeah.
But I guess mostly I was just going on the listings, like, to figure out what was interesting to me. Some places I visited too. Oh yeah, I think this place called Alpha Farm, in Oregon, I think I found out about that from someone I had met at Revis. I did go back to Revis also after I graduated. So it was a combination of, word of mouth and reading things in the book. And but the place that I ended up moving into, Zendik Farm, did actually have a website. And its website was actually instrumental in getting me there. But it was unusual in relation to other communities, which usually didn't have that.
So before you got to Zendik, which I'm sure you've talked a lot about Zendik. You wrote a book about it. But I'm curious, pre that, like when you were traveling around these communities, did they, were they aware of other communities in terms of like, they know that, first of all, they're intentional communities. So they already have a identity and like a inner culture, right? So they know that they're an entity, they're like a group. And then did they ever, I'm sure it was also diverse, but like, was there this concept of like, there is a society outside of us, which is like, I don't know, like like mainstream society. And then did they also be like, and there's also other intentional communities that are scattered along, in our country. And would it be interesting to like, I don't know, like make alliances with them, but like have a dialogue, like learn from them, have an exchange? Was there any of that going on?
Well, pretty much any community that I went to visit, by definition, had to know that there were others like it because they were in the communities directory, so they had filled out a form to be there, and they knew that existed. Also, in terms of cooperation among communities, there is an organization called the Federation of Egalitarian Communities.
Interesting.
It might have maybe 4 to 6 members at this point, but that is composed of income sharing communities. So they're all some version of a commune, I believe. Like, you're not allowed to draw on outside assets when you're there, and everybody gets the same amount of money per month and stuff. And also those communities commit to egalitarian values. So there was that going on. Another thing is that there are many instances of people living for a time at one community and then moving somewhere else.
Right.
So there was a lot of cross-pollination and ideas floating around as a result of that. There was also, I would say, everywhere I went, there was absolutely a sense of us in our little bubble, in our particular way that we live.
Yeah.
Compared to, if not necessarily versus, but definitely in stark contrast to the outside world.
Right. And for this like supply chain of people going in and then also coming out, I would imagine, it seems like it was during the 90s when you went, and my impression, I learned a lot about intentional communities as well. I'm sure we're going to use the word cults later, but like I feel like that was like a late 60s to 70s thing, like that's just my impression because that's how I learned about it. But it's like really fascinating how you were in the scene during the 90s. I just got back recently from a backpacking trip, and I had met some people who are through hiking the Appalachian Trail, and then they were telling my group that they would all meet in Atlanta, in Georgia, at the beginning in like March or something, and then like 8,000 people would start, and it's like a circuit. So like some people would like do it in like 3 months, some people take 8 months, and then like people do like the Triple Crown, which is like the AT Trail and the Pacific Crest Trail, and then there's this one that goes through like Nevada, and what I was thinking about was like how these people are also part of a community, I guess, like of hikers and backpackers, and what makes them they were so compelled. Like a lot of them were like compelled to go hiking. They needed to leave their world behind for all sorts of various diversely different reasons, you know. And when you were in these in these communities because you were studying them, you probably met many people who were on their own journeys, like who were compelled to leave. Maybe you felt a little bit that way too, right? Because you mentioned like you felt healthier and lighter, like spiritually and physically.
Well, I also, I would say I did feel a compulsion away from what I was familiar with, in the sense that the world I was coming out of just didn't make much sense to me. You know, I mean, I had been in school almost my entire life, and then school was ending, and I looked around at the paths being taken by most of my classmates who were going into banking or consulting or graduate school or law or whatever. And I looked at all those options and I thought, all that's doing is helping the world eating machine keep going around as it always has. Like, why would I insert myself into the maw of that machine? So I was certainly looking for something else.
Was this might be a random question, but like, when was the Unabomber?
The Unabomber was caught, I believe, in 1997.
1997. So
Yes.
did you read any of his stuff? Like his like Industrial Civilization or like
Well, at the time, I remember seeing the manifesto in whatever paper it was published in. Like, I remember kind of what the text looked like, and in my memory, which may be faulty, there was some kind of drawing made of Ted Kaczynski. You know,
that famous drawing, the one with the hoodie
Right.
and the sunglasses.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
I think it's possible that I started. My best guess is I started to read the manifesto and I stopped because it was so badly written. Really, as I learned later when I read his book, Technological Slavery, which is really quite good and quite compelling, I saw it's not that he's a bad writer, he didn't have an editor. That was the problem. But I actually felt a great kinship with Ted Kaczynski around the time when he was outed.
Yeah.
That year I was in an animation class, and I, worked for however many months on my final project, which was about it was called Ephemeral Express, and it was about this girl who's born on a hilltop and ends up like sending mail to everybody in the country, and then she returns to her sender by Ephemeral Express, and there was a song to go with it. And I dedicated it to Ted Kaczynski.
Interesting.
Because I could empathize with someone who wanted to go to the woods and be alone and felt really, really alienated from the rest of his fellow beings. I felt
Resonate.
kinship with him.
Absolutely. Yeah. So you kind of alluded to this. So you got to Zendek. You were on your study, like your research journey.
Well, I wouldn't say I was really doing research. I was exploring, but I was very much exploring with the intention of finding a place to be. Nice. There was nothing detached or academic about it.
Yeah, sure. Interesting. I have a friend who was like, yeah, I'm gonna get a grant. I don't know if I should be saying this. Well, she shall be unnamed. Got a grant to go to the Amazon to study, and it was just like funded like a legit ayahuasca ceremony for him. And I was like, so how much research did you do? He was like, I don't know, but I learned a lot about myself. You know what I mean? Yeah. So it's like really freaking cool how people hack the system in terms of like getting access to certain things. But so you were traveling with the intention of finding. So eventually you did find something, right? And like, what was it about their website that was instrumental for you?
Yeah. So before I found the website, I I originally found the group in the communities directory, and what was interesting to me about the listing in the communities directory was there were a number of things. One was they said they had the lowest average age of any community in the world. True or not, I don't know, but lots of young people, which was something I had enjoyed about the Dudley Co-op. They did not only back to the land type stuff and homesteading type stuff, but also art. And I considered myself an artist, and that's what I had studied in college, and writing and so on. And so a place where I could learn all the practical stuff, but also be an artist, that sounded really good. And also they had apprenticeships. Mm-hmm. And other places I had been, sometimes I would show up and they just wouldn't know what to do with me. You know, they were not very organized. Mm-hmm. And other places had very small populations and seemed to want to keep them that way. Mm-hmm. So having an explicit sign that they were welcoming people was important. So then I went to look at the website, and there was an essay on the website called The Big Lie, which was about how everyone is lying to each other all the time, both explicitly and by omission, that there's this skin of civility over everyday life that's just deadening. And that totally resonated with me. I had just seen The Matrix and had this visceral reaction of exactly, that's where I'm living and I have to break out.
Yeah.
So that essay just certainly spoke to me. And there was just something dark and strange and mysterious that came through to me from the website. You know, it wasn't like the other communities. The other communities were more likely to be sort of like bright and cheery and upbeat. Mm-hmm. And Zendik's vibe was not like that. It was like, there's something a little weird.
When they were on the website, you got that vibe, and then when you got there, they must have been able to close like something to you, right? Like close like the pitch to you, like, oh, you should stay. Or was it like you were just like, I'm gonna stay on my own accord?
Well, there was also an intermediate step. I did also call Zendik and talk to someone on the phone and ask some questions and didn't get very good answers, but, you know, they were good enough for me. So that was the next step in my sort of intake process. And then I went down to North Carolina. I took the bus from New York City to go visit, thinking I would just stay a couple weeks, and if I didn't like it, I would go and hike the Appalachian Trail. Okay. So I certainly did not show up with the intention of staying, and so far I hadn't lasted very long at any other place. So why would this be different? So, yeah, so when I first got there, I was quite skeptical. Zendik's best-known slogan is "Stop Bitching, Start a Revolution," and that's what they believed they were doing. They were starting a revolution to end ecocide and create a culture based on honesty and cooperation instead of lying and competition. And I remember when I first arrived, noticing people listening to Metallica while doing work. And I was like, Metallica, that's popular music. How could they be revolutionaries and be listening to popular music?
That's like the Britney Spears of that time, right? I mean, I don't know.
I have no idea.
Yeah, sure. Okay.
Yeah.
So okay.
So I was skeptical about that, and I just kind of didn't believe it, you know? And also, you know, for the first few days that I was there, I just remember feeling kind of dislocated. I mean, I was suddenly thrust into this place with all these people, and I was mostly working. I was on usually large or small crews of people, you know, doing all kinds of homestead work. I remember, you know, digging, like shoveling leaves out of a culvert and raking the grass and all this stuff. And just, I mean, I wasn't super excited about doing physical labor all the time. I mean, I kind of saw it as a maybe a step towards self-improvement, you know, as a person who hadn't been super physically active for most of my life. So I was like, yeah, this is good for me. But it was, you know, it was a little hard. The work was not the most exciting work, but really what was exciting was the social sphere, you know, and just being people all the time. I really, from the start, I really admired most people I met. They seemed very articulate and confident. They had all the certainty in their purpose that I did not have. They also had lots of practical skills, and were on the whole very attractive. So all of that was appealing, and I think pretty early on, despite my skepticism, I did start feeling like I wanted to be one of them. Like I wanted them to like me and to accept me into their group. And early on, also, I learned about the Zendik dating scheme, which involved having a third party, quote, hit somebody else up for a sexual encounter, on your behalf, which, to somebody else might have sounded like set an alarm off, but for me, I felt totally inept at the mating dance, so to me, that was an advantage. I thought that was pretty interesting, and there were lots of hot guys, so that was great.
Hey.
Yeah. So there are a number of things that kind of pulled me in, and then there were other things that just sort of drew me away from my old identity. Like the farm at that time was in Polk County, North Carolina, about 40 or 45 minutes from Asheville. It was really pretty isolated, and I didn't drive. I didn't come with a vehicle, so I wasn't going to get in it and drive away. And we didn't have many visitors, except for people who came to check out the farm and see if they wanted to live there, but not many casual visitors, hardly at all. So I was just immersed in this field of people who were all totally sure that theirs was the only way to live. And so it was easy to absorb that. And it was also, I wasn't unable to communicate with people on the outside, but I didn't have privacy to do that. Like the phone I had access to was in the middle of the main gathering place in the farm. I did have email. I did use that a little bit, but like my mother didn't have an email account at that time. It was very uncommon.
Right.
So yeah, I think it was a combination of being isolated, but also being isolated, having this drumbeat in my ear. This is the only thing worth doing. We're starting a revolution. We're saving the planet, and also various things that really were attractive.
So with the whole certainty of their purpose in life, like looking back at it now, and it's 2021 now, we see that a lot, I feel, in our day-to-day with not just intentional communities, but like, it's almost like the zeitgeist is that at the moment where you have large swaths of the population being like, I'm pretty sure this is the way it should be, and whoever disagrees with me is like, almost like non-human or something, or like the devil or something like that. So did you feel that was the case when you were traveling, or even in Zendek, before that, after that, during this is what, early 2000s, right? And then at that time, did you feel you saw a lot of certainty around you? Maybe there was a certainty of like, oh yeah, of course, like expansionary capitalism is the only way, more growth, right? And then you go here and they're like, no, stop the ecocide. We're going to redefine what mating and partnership means. Like that's the right way. Or did you feel like in the overall culture there was much more, how should I say, malaise or just alienation? So like not understanding exactly what you should be doing, versus like when you got to this place, these people were so resolute in where they were going, that was like a contrast. I'm not sure. I wasn't I don't even think I was like fully formed at that time. So
well, I think in the mainstream at that time, I think there was kind of an unspoken, unarticulated form of certainty, in the sense that, as far as I could tell, everybody I came in contact with just basically believed the story of civilization, the story of industrial civilization, that this is how it is. We live in house boxes. We go to jobs. We use money for almost everything, and the best thing you can do for yourself is get a good education and start a career and keep making more and more money until you retire. Like, that whole story seemed to me very intact, according to the people who were living by it, and it didn't make any sense to me. So then part of the Zendik story was, we are starting this revolution and making these amazing changes that are going to spread all over the world. But another part of it was, very simply, they're wrong. Those people who are so sure of themselves out in the mainstream world, they're wrong. And you're not crazy because you don't fit in. They're crazy, you're sane. So that was sort of the gateway drug, was being in touch with all these people who affirmed the way that I had been feeling and told me it was an asset and not a deficit, for the first time.
And do you feel like if there was another group somewhere else in the world that had the same message to you, like, what would that have meant? Like, to maybe you would have joined them if they were espousing that, like, no, I mean, obviously you described there's all these other factors that made Zendik appealing to you. But, like, what I'm getting at is, most places don't have that message, I guess. They were much more, I guess, tolerant of the mainstream narrative. Is that, like, a good way to look at it?
Well, I think chances are, if you're visiting an actual intentional community, you're going to encounter some version of those people out there doing it wrong. Because if people didn't think that way, they probably wouldn't have joined a separate community. But I think that the average intentional community does not reach the level of calling the outside world a death culture, saying everybody's lying all the time. So I think generally it's the cults that go so far in that direction. It's possible that if I had encountered some other community that gave me the same kind of affirmation that what I felt was real, that I might have, I might have moved in with them. But I think there was something possibly about the extremism of the Zendik point of view and the black and whiteness of it that may have appealed to me at the time.
So I find it really interesting that they use the word death culture, right? Was that something from the founders of Zendik, or?
Yeah, the two founders, Wolf and Errol. Wolf was the guy and Errol was his partner. Wolf did a lot of writing and talking and speaking and so on, and as far as I know, he came up with the term death culture.
Like, yeah, I've been part of, subcultures that would use terms like that, and I feel like what once was, in group, like, very niche worldviews in intact communities, intentional or not, like, they were intact, now has become almost like an aesthetic that can reach mass appeal. So, like, the ways that I was exposed to, like, terms like death culture, it wasn't through, like, an intentional community, it was through, like, music. And then you can, as someone partaking in, like, the mainstream, who also obviously is going into, like, different subcultures, like, you can harbor these mentalities and aesthetics, right? Because, like, you would dress a certain way and talk a certain way, but at the end of the day, I still felt at home in mainstream society, even though I was, like, alienated by it. But it was, like, a thing where when I was young, I could, like, go against, but that was, like, an identity that I took within the larger framework. And not been exposed to intentional communities until like much later in my like teenage years, that I always felt like, okay, this is really interesting to see kind of the how should I say this, the spreading of like these realities and making them recuperated by like the mainstream almost. Yeah. And going back to the whole us versus them, right? I find it interesting how we have right now a debate within our country, like the USA. There's a talk about borders, right? And like identity. So you have a debate raging on about like open borders versus like closed borders. Like we need more controls, and like we need to know who's coming in, because like they're not integrating, they're not like learning our language, English, they're not seeing the same way as we are. They're gonna vote differently. We can't control how they vote or something like that, right? And then so you have like this large country like the United States that's grappling with this issue. And on one hand, it's interesting because when you at a small community, like let's just say, how big was Zendek?
When I was there, the population ranged from about 55 up to about 70 and down to about 35.
35. Okay. So there was this group, Zendek Farms, and there would never be a like debate about open borders within the group. I would imagine it would be like, look, this is our group, like not just like the physical territory, but like just within the group. It's not like we're gonna have like anyone can come in and like, we're gonna put our stuff on Airbnb and then like they can stay here for a while. There was a vetting process, I imagine.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, there was an intensive vetting process.
Yeah, and for most of these intentional communities, would you say, for the most part, there was no talk of like open borders? I don't know what the equivalent to that is. Are there intentional communities that are just like super non-exclusive?
Well, back in the 70s, there were. There was this place in California called Morningside Ranch, whose owner deeded the property to God and said anyone was welcome, no one could be kicked out. So in the 70s, I think that happened.
What happened to it?
What happened to it? Well, it had lots of problems. Drugs, crime, probably a bunch of sexual assaults, sanitation issues, and the local authorities showed up and said, you have to clean up your act or people have to leave or something. And actually, the owner may have deeded the property to God in response to that. But eventually, as I recall, I believe the authorities came in and just bulldozed the place. So that's what I remember. I could be wrong. But as far as borders in these smaller communities today, I would say any intentional community would have borders and would have processes for allowing people in. I would say that the cults would probably have, on the one hand, in some cases, depending on the cult, and this wasn't really true of Zendek, but some cults have intensive recruiting operations, trying to bring lots of people in. And then, but also I'm guessing with quite a lot of vetting going on. So sometimes intensive recruiting, but then also intensive expulsion.
Yeah, purging, processes. Right?
Yes,
metabolism.
Purging. Right. Yeah. Whereas a healthy intentional community, like Earthhaven, where I've been spending a bunch of time in the past 5 years or so, they have explicit processes for people entering the community, for people attaining, greater levels of responsibilities and privileges within the community. And also individuals can have visitors, without necessarily being vetted. by the community. Although if something were to become a problem, it could become a village issue.
Mm-hmm.
So
Village issue. I like that.
Yeah.
Village issue. Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, I think any intentional community is going to have a sense of who belongs and who doesn't, and processes for entry. But there are maybe a lot of gradations along the scale. And Zendik, there are also gradations as far as, hierarchy and power and prestige. But there was also a pretty bright line about as far as who was in and who was out. I mean, when you first showed up, there was maybe you were allowed to be a visitor, and everybody knew you weren't going to commit immediately. But after you've been there a certain amount of time, it's like you're in or you're out. And the choice wasn't necessarily up to you because you could be expelled.
Sure, got it. It was expulsion by committee. There was a
pretense of expulsion by committee in which Errol, the leader, would tell the group to get together and decide what to do with so-and-so. But we all knew what we were supposed to decide. And then there were other times when, where the expulsion, I would say, wasn't explicit, but the person was just under such duress for so long that they, couldn't take it.
So in order for a community to be cohesive or just last, would you agree that it is important to have a defined I don't know, territory in terms of physical as well as social? So it's I do belong to this group, and people who don't belong to this group are different. And not saying that there is a judgment call on that, they're lower or better. I'm not saying that. It's just there is a diversity. This is my group. There are people outside of my group. They have their own group, but is that in all of your experiences with intentional communities, is that would seem to be an important aspect of having a group of people that you could call your community, right? Like an actual community.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I think that's part of what holds a group together is knowing what we are for, knowing what we are against, knowing what norms we all agree to live by that are different from the mainstream, because if you're not doing something different, then why bother? At Dancing Rabbit, this is a community in Missouri that I visited a few years ago. They did something really smart as far as allowing people to self-select, do I belong here or don't I? They prohibit personal vehicles. If you want to go somewhere in a motor vehicle, you have to join a co-op, and there are only a handful of vehicles for the whole community.
So what if you drove there, you just park it and it doesn't move?
I am not sure how all that works. Yeah. If you have to give it to, I don't know.
Fascinating. No, that's cool. Okay, but keep going.
And then if you build a house, you're required to use maybe only sustainable wood or something like that. And then there's something else I'm not remembering, but basically what holds these basic standards together is that it's very easy to tell whether someone is flouting them or not, as opposed to, well, you're not allowed to use your cell phone here. Well, who knows what you're doing in your bedroom,
Right.
So, but I think actually putting forth in very clear, concrete, and what could seem like, well, I'll stop there. Putting forth in very clear and concrete terms what the community is for and what it won't stand for is a favor to people considering joining, because they can tell if they want to live there or not. And that's not coercive and it's not mean. It just saves people a lot of time.
It's very clever. It's very optimized in minimizing, I guess, wasted time and confusion, right? Okay, yeah. That's fascinating. The so going back to the U.S. as a whole, just in the times we're in, this, I don't know if it's because I'm older now and I pay taxes, so I care more about things, but it seems like, um, as you say, a community, we have to know who we are, like what we stand for, what we believe in, and then we have a country, right? We have like a nation state like the U.S. And I don't know. Maybe we do agree. Like this is a very diverse place with so many viewpoints. Like, you got 10 people. I think it's gonna be 10 different viewpoints here. So, how how does something like the U.S. continue to exist going forward? Right, like just having the debate of the borders issue, I think is very telling. You have people who want closed borders for a multitude of reasons, and then you have people who want open borders, which are all the by the first step, like by what we were talking about before. It's like you don't build a identity by opening borders, right? Like you need to establish your territory to know who, like to defend it. I guess I don't know. Like there's other reasons to have borders, but like if you are advocating for an open border, like let's just for example, if I went to Dancing Rabbit or I went to any of these intentional communities and I'm there for like 6 months and they like me, and then all of a sudden one day I'm like, hey, I think we should just let more people in, like everyone in, like I would obviously be kicked out, I would imagine, or at least I'll be told not to. That's not cool.
You would be told no, that's not going to happen. You wouldn't necessarily be kicked out. It
right.
would depend on what else you did.
Exactly. But yeah, you would be told that's not going to happen, and I find it fascinating right now that we're having that debate because on one hand, I think the U.S. is too big and like too unwieldy, but on the other hand, it's like, okay, what do you think is like the natural progression? Where are we going in terms? Because I assume, have met so many different people in your travels, right? And like you probably have a feel for different viewpoints from like a very, I think, nuanced view, because you meet people who are like thinking deeply about this. So I don't know. What are your thoughts on like how do you keep the U.S. from devolving into civil unrest that we're seeing right now? I'm not sure if you're following the news, but people are like shooting at each other now in the streets who are politically opposed. It used to just be like about actual money and turf, right? With like drugs or something, and then they have beef over economics. But right now this is like a layer above economics. It's like people are shooting each other over identity, in this country. On like in Portland, for example, or in Newburgh the other day, they had graffiti on one of the restaurants, like defaced it, saying like "fuck Antifa," and like had like what are those called? It was like I guess it's like a cross with the circle around it. It's like a neo-Nazi symbol. But I'm not gonna read too much into it, But it's like really interesting how it's bubbling to the point where, dude, Newburgh got hit, right? Like in the middle of nowhere, Hudson Valley,
Yeah.
So what do you see coming down the road in terms of like, do we need secession? Do we need like people to just break up into smaller groups and like get ready to just get into your local communities because supply chains are going to be disrupted with all of the unrest,
Well, I see the United States not necessarily as a coherent entity, but more as a Frankenstein's monster, that was from the beginning built on coercion. At the time the Declaration of Independence was signed, I believe there were about 500,000 enslaved people living in the colonies to which that declaration did not apply. And, of course, the Native Americans were being killed, and they were being actually sent to the West Indies as slaves, and their land was being taken away, and their culture destroyed, and so on. So a thing about communities... I would say that an important indicator of how a community is going to do in the long term is how it began. So Zendik began with two people, two partners who were out to save the world. Like a guru and his first follower gathered a bunch of other followers around him. Earthhaven, which I would say is quite a healthy, intentional community, was founded by, I think, 12 or 13 people who all came together. They had, similar ideas about what they wanted. They got together, they bought land, they created a council hall that's round so everyone can sit in a circle and discuss and make decisions by consensus or at least a modified form thereof. So if it's true that the seeds of an entity's future lie in its origins, if you look at the origins of the United States, I mean, first of all, during the revolution, I'm sure there were people shooting each other in the streets over their political beliefs, like the British versus the colonists. And that was the beginning. But then there was the Louisiana Purchase and Manifest Destiny and moving west and taking and just killing 60 million buffalo in order to deprive the Native Americans of their food source. Like all of that it's not like the country just organically grew and developed itself. Its expansion was always created by force. And back to the Native Americans, many of them were sent to these boarding schools where they were not allowed to speak their language. They were forced to assimilate. So if you look at a country with a history of forced incorporation, forced assimilation, like I would say force doesn't work in the long term to keep people together. So and there's also, you mentioned a book called, I think, 11 Nations.
The 11 Nations of the U.S.
Yeah, that there are deep fault lines within the country, and there's a pretense that we're all part of the same thing. But I mean, I don't have a crystal ball, and when I attempt to look into the future, I don't necessarily see some kind of collapse or widespread secession. And when I try to think about it myself, part of what comes up is like, damn, that would be incredibly inconvenient, right? You couldn't just order something and have it delivered by FedEx.
Right.
There would be, tariffs and borders and stuff like that. However, I do think that would be quite salutary for humans, at least for a lot of, for any human who is able to sort of deal with this, really on a story level, and also for the web of life, because what the United States has become is this incredibly efficient, well-ordered war machine. War on other countries, war on our own bodies and our soil and so on. And so by definition, if you have this amazingly accomplished and efficient war machine, if you break it up into smaller pieces, it's gonna become less efficient. There's gonna be friction. It's going to cause less harm.
Yeah, I mean, it reminds me of Switzerland, how the centralized government, if you could call it that, because Switzerland's like I think 9 cantons, like little communities, literally, I think one of them is 9,000 people or something like that. It's a great, I mean, there are historical factors that enable Switzerland to do this, but the centralized government can't even collect taxes that last more than 3 years or something, and phases out and stuff like that. When they really took the original I think Jeffersonian model of the United States to heart, and they implemented it. Whereas I think we got the Hamiltonian or Lincoln model, basically. Companies get subsidies and stuff. Yeah, so going back, let me just check the time. So really quickly, going back to what you were saying, and I think this is so important, a community's long-term viability starts with its inception, right? And so now
now you've settled down. You have a house with a great partner, and you guys work together. Do you still go to visit Earth Haven community? Like how often do you go do that?
Well, it really varies. So far this year, I've been there once for a month. I'll probably go back for another month, and then during COVID, like not very much at all. So for in the past 5 years, I've spent a little more than a total of a year there.
And do you find that going to when you travel to other places and you meet people, like, do you feel like most people that you meet wouldn't be a good fit in intentional communities because they've been socialized in another way to live in a house with their nuclear family, and then like they have coworkers and they have like their drinking buddies, or I don't know, Netflix buddies or something like that. What would it take to get more people to understand the value of having like the word intentional community is so loaded, I feel, because it almost sounds like it takes effort to do, which it does. It does. And why is it that we discount the effort it takes to exist in the mainstream world? Is it just because we're so materially abundant that we don't see the other costs that are hidden in not having real friends, I guess, or real real conditions to be like emotionally vulnerable? I'm not sure. Like I think you have a little more experience with intentional communities, and maybe people talk about this.
Well, I think one thing that leads people to intentional community, I think is crisis and a push of something goes wrong, or there's some blip in the matrix. Like someone might get super ill and the medical industrial complex is not able to help, so then they start looking for a place to live that's in the woods, where they can drink spring water. Like that sort of thing happens. But I think maybe the main difference is just story. I don't know that it's so much that people think about it and decide living in an intentional community is too much work. It's just that if you're living in the story of the nuclear family and so on, and nothing shows up to pierce that story in a really obvious way, and everybody around you seems to agree with it and be upholding it, whether or not they're super excited about it, then of course you're going to keep going with that.
Right.
And I think some people get pushed out of that story, again, like by some kind of a crisis, or maybe by some seed in childhood of feeling like a misfit or something. But okay, I want to talk about the term intentional community. I don't necessarily love this term. I very much prefer the term village.
Okay.
And plenty of communities don't call themselves villages. Earth Haven, it's called Earth Haven Eco Village, and it is definitely a village. I think the term village, intentional community, sounds sort of like new and technocratic. We're going to make an intentional community.
Yeah.
And a village is just villaging is something that humans do.
Right.
And something that we have couldn't not do for thousands and thousands of years.
Right.
So using villaging as a verb too, I think makes it more possible to do anywhere.
Word.
Like I can village in Beacon, and Beacon is not set up for villaging in the way that at Earth Haven that's built into the infrastructure. It's not built into the infrastructure here. But I can still do it.
Can you go over a little bit how Beacon, like or most cities, are not built for villaging?
Yeah. So, for example, at Earth Haven, the property is more than 300 acres, and there are no paved roads inside on the land. The speed limit is, I believe, 10 miles an hour, and the roads are all gravel or dirt, so you can speed, but it's a little harder anyway. But so it's so. And the roads are all pretty narrow. So I'm talking, I mean, as a walker in particular, you know, I walk around, you know, the roads in Beacon. They're all paved, they're wide, there's vehicles speeding by all the time. Occasionally someone I know will honk at me from inside a motor vehicle. They can see me and I can't see them.
Sure.
At Earth Haven, often if I'm walking down a path or a road, either the person who's coming towards me is on foot, so I can see them and say hi, or if they're in a vehicle, they're going very slowly, and I can see them and they wave to me. That's one thing. Also, the village of Earth, it's not super dense, and there's a bunch of different neighborhoods, but there's a central council hall where council occurs, the governing process, and also lots of other events. It's used for tons of different things. So there's a village center. There's a central gathering place. There are, you know, tons of events that bring people together, and everybody who has been through the process to become a member is welcome to participate in governance.
Right.
You know. Whereas, I mean, in Beacon, I think governance is healthier than it is on a larger scale, because in Beacon, you know, it's very easy to come face to face with your city council person or even the mayor. Like, that's not hard.
Right.
People are known within the community. But it's not like anybody can just go to a city council meeting and sit in the council. I can go and I can watch.
Right.
I can ask a question and make a comment, you know, but that's about it.
So how big is Earth Haven? How many people?
There are between 60 and 100. I just really don't know. And there are full members and provisional members and guests and so on. There's
you're
a
a provisional member?
No. I'm a short-term new root, I think, which is
short-term new root.
I think so.
Is that a term?
Yeah, that's a term. And I believe if I spend one more month there, I will be a long-term new root.
Long-term new root. Okay, that's cool. Is that a term from Earth Haven? Excuse me.
Yeah. I mean, at Earth Haven, that is my status as far as I know.
Cool. So they have their own. You know, they have their own lingo, basically, terminology. Yeah. That's cool. Yeah. Sweet. That's so good. I love the term villaging. It has a lot more connotations too. I'm definitely gonna be using that going forward. Are there so you can call what you know, intentional communities technocratic. It sounds like a lot of work. Let's call it villaging. And do you have any words, because we're trying to tell a story, right? Like, do you have any words that can describe, you know, normal life? Like, for example, like I use the term when I talk to people, I use like the term mother culture, even though it sounds nourishing. I got it from Daniel Quinn from his like Ishmael trilogy. He often talks about the mother culture, which is like invisible to you, and it's like you just take it for granted. That's the way things are done. But I am searching for other terms, maybe not as harsh as like industrial society, you know what I mean, or like dystopia or something like that. What is it that we're going through right now? Right, today I was walking around Newburgh, driving around, and also walking, but it's like, it is not a conducive way to be embedded in like a social fabric, because I'm in a car. I'm also like, I'm late for stuff, you know what I mean? And it's like the opposite of villaging. I mean, Newburgh is not as bad as like Manhattan per se, right? But it's like, they're kind of like on the same side of the spectrum, which is not villaging. Like, I would call it like not villaging, but there should be another term for it that maybe we can find.
Well, one term that I do use the term industrial civilization. I also like zombie corporatocracy, but I don't think that's what you're looking for. A term that could be useful comes from Charles Eisenstein. He talks about the story of interbeing versus the story of separation. And I think you could call what we're living in and going through right now, you could call that the story of separation.
Okay.
You know, like in the sense that a story is not just a tale you tell, a story is something you live inside.
Right.
And when someone's shooting someone else over their political beliefs, that is absolutely the story of separation. And that's an extreme version. And then there's all kinds of, all kinds of other more subtle manifestations.
Isn't it true that, okay, maybe I'll rephrase the question. It's like conflict and violence are like the flip side to, also part of like keeping an identity, because like you have to protect your territory, right? I'm not trying to frame it in terms of like might makes right per se. I'm trying to say like if someone is, for example, going to take over Earth Haven, let's just say shit hits the fan, there's no clean water. Oh, but these guys, good stewards of the earth, I'm assuming the environment's very good over there. And so you have like a mob of people who are organized and they're like, yeah, we're going to take what you have. This is an extreme example,
right.
But it's like, I feel like this is a story people are telling themselves, like, oh my God, people are coming for my stuff. People are coming for what I've accrued and I've built, so I have to like shoot back. Maybe I'll attack first, strike first, or maybe no, I'm not attacking. I'm shooting second, right? Like they shot first, I'm coming back at them, and I'm not so sure what like a place like Earth Haven, what their policy is on like violence and self-defense, for example. I don't know if if that's even a topic like people talk about,
Yeah, I don't really want to comment on that because I'm not a member and I'm
sure.
It doesn't I don't think I'd want to speak for anybody.
Right. I want to say about Earth Haven. I'm sorry. Let's leave them aside. Personally, for you as someone, because when I think of Helen, I think of someone who is very, excuse the term, but intentional. Like you're trying to do the right thing, right? Again, we're looking at your house. Like the ingredients of this house, for the most part, you can put in your mouth, swallow it, and it'll be okay, Yeah. And so I was wondering if you've ever had to think about like violence in terms of like, maybe self-defense or right now we're all, they're trying to tell us stuff we have to put in our bodies, right? And then we have to like figure out ways maybe to lessen that impact, right? So like you would want to choose to take a specific type of vaccine in this case, not just willy-nilly close your eyes like, yeah, just roll the dice and give me whatever you got, right? So like that is a form of self-defense, but like also when you get to, because we're being pushed more and more in that direction of like one day someone's coming at you, for something that you have no control over, maybe. Right? Like, oh, you just look a certain way, so we're gonna come attack you or something like that. Like, what? Like, I mean, do you ever have to think about, or have you ever thought about what it means to like live in a violent mainstream society?
Yeah, I mean, when I was in high school, I took karate classes for 9 months because I had been sexually assaulted multiple times on the subway, and I was like, well, I gotta learn how to defend myself. And I did learn how to kick and punch and yell and stuff, but I never did end up using those skills to explicitly defend myself. But I did develop the attitude that you don't have the right to do that to me. And I had not had that attitude when those assaults had happened.
Right.
So having that mindset, like, yes, it's okay to stand up for myself, that was, the most important thing that came out of that. I think talking about violence as a woman, I think is quite different from talking about it as a man.
Sure.
As a person who's, it would be, more difficult for me to physically hurt someone, right? And I'm less inclined, I think, biologically to want to do that or to go to war or something. I honor in in men, I would say that impulse, to protect and defend by physical means if necessary. And I can certainly imagine situations in which I would use force to defend myself or something that I deeply believed in. Another thing about violence too is, like, I don't think that violence is inherently bad, and I absolutely don't think that conflict is inherently bad. I think there is nothing wrong with either of them. And something that I have thought about as I've been investigating my Scottish ancestry, I'm not only Scottish, but that's the part I'm most interested in, is the idea of local artisanal warfare. That in the Scottish Highlands, the clans were fighting each other all the time. And there was no standing army, and there was no huge federal war chest to just finance wars, which meant that any war leader who wanted support had to earn it. Like, I'm a kick-ass leader. I'm going to, give you land if we win. I'm going to take care of you. If the warriors lost faith in their leader, they would fall away. You wouldn't be able to keep the war going. That was one thing, so you didn't end up with perpetual war.
Sure.
But another thing is that when you have local artisanal warfare and you just have clans killing each other over, their cattle or their land or whatever, yes, people die, and I'm not saying it was pretty, but the land, the entire web of life, doesn't get destroyed.
Yeah.
It remains fairly intact.
Yeah.
Whereas here in the United States, we pretend that for the most part, we are so much, we are so much less violent than we used to be. Cue Steven Pinker.
Yeah.
But it's more that the violence has just gone underground. You went in World War I. You went from producing nerve gas or whatever. Oh, what are we going to do with all these poisons? Oh, we're going to make war on the soil. And then there's war on people's bodies. Like, take this shot or else, right? So the violence exists. I don't know that the sum of it is ever going to increase or decrease, but it's just important to be honest about what's being violated and how, and not pretend that all that counts as violence is somebody kicking or shooting somebody else.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, I'm very glad I asked that question, because that was an amazing answer. Like, I really appreciate artisanal warfare. No, it's true. It's very true, because you can either have like okay, for example, who is this, like the McDougalls versus the something? There's like some Irish or Scottish clans, like they still fight each other in Boston or something like that.
I've heard of the Hatfields and the McCoys.
I think
they were in Kentucky.
Yes, in Kentucky. They were like Scots-Irish or something.
Probably.
And then they brought their feud over, and then they had like some truce or something like that. But I think it's really funny how they have a truce, but now we have nuclear weapons. You know what I mean? So
and Roundup,
and all sorts of crazy shit in our water, and
right. Like, let's destroy all the microorganisms upon which our lives depend.
But we don't see that as violence.
No,
right? We don't see that.
It's just the background, or not even the background. It just doesn't enter most people's consciousness. Most people don't know that soil is alive in the first place.
Right.
So genocide of microorganisms. What? What are microorganisms?
Right. Okay, cool. I think that this was a great starting point. I hope that we can do this again. Helen, can you kind of let people know, where they can find you? I would love for you to also just tell people about the book you wrote, and like how to get in contact if they wanted to do another interview with you, because I did not do this justice. But we had to do this again. But please, like, tell people how they can reach you.
Yeah, okay. So the number one place to reach me on the internet is my website, which is helenzuman.com, HelenZuman.com. There you will find information about my book. You can sign up for my mailing list. If you do, you will receive the first chapter of my book, as well as some readings, a story I wrote when I was under the influence of Zendik, and some other fun things. My book, it's my memoir of my 5 years at Zendik. It's called Mating in Captivity. And there's a page on my website, books or whatever, where you can find out all about it. You can order a signed copy. You can find out, it's available from all the usual places.
Order it.
Yes, please do.
And how about chocolate?
Yes. So
Yes.
I have a podcast of my own called Chocolate Church, where heretics go for communion, which Acre was kind enough to be a guest on very recently. So you can find Chocolate Church, the podcast, on Apple, Spotify, etc. Also on my website. And you can order Holy Crack from my Etsy shop. You'll find the link to the Etsy shop at helenzuman.com/chocolatechurch. Holy Crack is my amazing, super strong chocolate made with, of course, only the finest ingredients.
Dude, if you guys see this house, it's like eating this house. It's so totally awesome. Awesome. Thank you, Helen, so much. Hopefully we can do this again. I'm very grateful that you took the time. And thanks so much. Everyone check out Helen's book, and we'll see you in the future. Thanks for listening. Peace out. Salute.